The entire palace went silent when I said, "Dad, I am not your slave." For a moment, even the flames of the torches seemed to freeze in disbelief. The echo of my voice hung in the marble halls, trembling against the golden walls that had witnessed centuries of royal obedience. My father's eyes, those cold, commanding eyes, locked onto mine, burning with a fury that only kings possess. No one dared to breathe. The councilmen lowered their gazes, and my mother's hand trembled as she clutched her necklace. I could feel every gaze pierce through me, as if I had committed a crime far greater than treason. Defiance. I had spent my life kneeling before him, following every order, every decree, every lesson carved into me since childhood. I was the prince, the heir. My life had never been mine to live. Every meal, every word, every smile was measured by what the crown would approve. But that day something inside me broke. Maybe it was years of silence, or maybe it was the realization that I had become a puppet dressed in royal robes. The palace that once felt like a home now felt like a gilded cage, and my father was the warden. He rose from his throne, each step echoing like thunder. "Watch your tongue," he growled, his voice cold as steel. But I didn't flinch. I had spent too many nights staring at the ceiling, asking myself who I really was beneath the weight of the crown. I wasn't born to be someone's obedient son. I was meant to be something more. His anger couldn't cage me anymore. His kingdom couldn't own me. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of the king. I could see the pain flicker in my mother's eyes. She had always been silent between us, caught between her husband's rule and her son's rebellion. I knew what my words had done. They had torn the illusion of peace that kept this palace breathing. But what peace was it when I was dying inside every day? What kind of son could I be if I allowed myself to remain chained to expectations that suffocated me? The courtiers whispered among themselves, their fear palpable. A prince defying his father was not just a family matter, it was a threat to the entire monarchy. But in that silence, I felt something new, a sense of freedom. My voice, though trembling, carried truth. I had finally spoken not as a prince, but as a man tired of being controlled. The crown could wait, the throne could crumble, but I refused to live as a shadow of my father's will. He stared at me for a long time, as if trying to find the obedient boy he once molded. But he couldn't find him, because he was gone. All that remained was a young man with fire in his heart and scars of silent wars etched across his soul. I stood there, unyielding, ready for whatever storm he was about to unleash. I had already lost too much to fear losing more. That day, the palace learned something my father never could. That power doesn't come from bloodlines or thrones. It comes from the courage to say no, even when your voice shakes. And as I turned to leave the hall, the sound of my footsteps echoed through the stillness, marking the first time in my life I truly walked my own path. My father's voice thundered behind me before I could even reach the doors. "Come back here!" he roared, the sound sharp enough to make the guards freeze mid-step. I stopped, but I didn't turn. For years, that voice had been enough to control me, to make me bow, to make me apologize, to make me obey. But this time, it only reminded me of everything I had endured in silence. The weight of his authority no longer pressed against my spine the way it used to. I was tired of being the prince who carried the kingdom's honor while losing every piece of himself in the process. His footsteps approached slowly, deliberate and heavy. I could feel his presence closing in, his anger radiating like fire. "You think you can defy me and walk away?" he hissed. I clenched my fists, fighting the urge to look back. I wanted to say that I wasn't defying him. I was just choosing myself for once. But he wouldn't understand. To him, love was control. Loyalty was obedience, and family was just another chain polished in gold. The silence that followed was suffocating, broken only by the pounding of my own heart. When he finally spoke again, his tone was colder, quieter, but far more dangerous. Everything you have, the clothes on your back, the breath in your lungs, comes from me. Without this kingdom, you are nothing. The word struck deep, like blades hidden beneath velvet. That was his belief, that without the crown, I was meaningless. But in that moment, I realized how wrong he was. Maybe I wasn't a king yet, maybe I wasn't powerful like him, but I had something he had lost long ago, my heart, my will, and my ability to feel. I turned to face him, and for the first time, I didn't see a father. I saw a man so consumed by his crown that he'd forgotten what it meant to be human. His face was red with fury, yet behind his eyes was something else. Fear. Fear of losing control. Fear of being questioned. Fear that the kingdom he ruled might one day see the cracks behind his mask. If that is true, I said quietly, then I'd rather be nothing than live as your slave. The words came out steady, but my chest burned as if I had ripped open a wound that had been festering for years. The councilmen dared not speak, but their eyes told 1,000 stories. Some pitied me, others despised me. To them, I was reckless, emotional, unfit to rule. But none of them had ever lived the way I did, bound by invisible chains, performing perfection for a father who only saw worth in control. My mother took a step forward, tears glistening in her eyes. "Please," she whispered, her voice trembling, "don't do this. You're tearing this family apart." I wanted to tell her that the family was already torn long before I spoke, that love had been replaced by duty, and duty had devoured us all. My father turned his gaze toward her, his jaw tightening. "He needs to learn his place," he said sharply, and the guards moved closer. For a heartbeat, I thought he might order them to seize me. My body tensed, but I didn't move. I wouldn't kneel again. I had made my choice, even if it meant losing everything, my title, my home, even my name. I would not surrender, because freedom, even in exile, was better than living as a royal puppet. Then, without another word, I bowed my head, not in submission, but in farewell. I walked past the guards, past the courtiers who couldn't meet my eyes, and into the cold corridors of the palace that had raised me. My footsteps echoed behind me like ghosts of my past life. I didn't know where I was going or what awaited me beyond those golden gates, but for the first time, the air didn't taste like silence and duty. It tasted like freedom, raw, uncertain, and painfully real. The night air hit my face like a rush of truth. It was colder than I remembered, sharper too, as though even the wind wanted to remind me what freedom really costs. I walked past the courtyard where I had trained as a child, past the fountain where my mother used to sit and hum lullabies that only I could hear. Every stone, every shadow, every whisper of the palace seemed to ache with memory, but I didn't turn back. Behind me was the life of a prince built on obedience. Ahead of me was uncertainty, but it was mine. For once, I was walking not because I was told to, but because I wanted to. The guards at the outer gates hesitated when they saw me. Their eyes flickered with confusion and fear. No one left the palace without the king's word, especially not the heir. "Your Highness," one of them stammered, "we can't let you." I raised my hand and he fell silent. "Tell my father," I said softly, "that his prince has chosen to become a man." They didn't move after that. Perhaps they understood, or perhaps they simply didn't have the courage to stop me. Either way, the gates opened with a groan that sounded like the kingdom itself exhaling. As I stepped beyond the walls, the world unfolded before me in a way it never had before. The sky stretched endlessly, unfiltered by palace windows or royal ceilings. The stars seemed closer, almost like they were watching. I felt small beneath them, but also alive. The silence of the outside world wasn't oppressive like the silence of the throne room. It was peaceful, almost welcoming. I didn't know what I would eat, where I would sleep, or what tomorrow would bring, but at least it would be my choice. I walked until my feet ached, and the palace lights were nothing more than distant specks behind me. The sound of the crickets, the rustle of leaves, even the distant howl of wolves, all of it felt more honest than the polite applause of courtiers or the cold speeches of the council. The world didn't bow before me, it didn't care who I was, and maybe that was the beauty of it. Out here, I wasn't the prince. I wasn't the son of a king. I was just a man learning how to breathe for the first time. But even as I embraced that freedom, a part of me ached for the family I had left behind. I thought of my mother's tearful eyes, her trembling hands. She had never been the enemy, just another prisoner in that golden cage. I wished I could tell her that I wasn't running away from her. I was running from the version of myself that the palace had created. Maybe someday she would understand. Maybe she would even forgive me. But tonight, forgiveness wasn't what I sought. I only wanted to exist without a crown weighing down my soul. The road ahead was long and uncertain. I had no servants to guide me, no guards to protect me, but every step I took felt like reclaiming a piece of myself that I had lost to duty. My heart was heavy, yes, but it beat with purpose. I remember the words my tutor once told me when I was a boy: a king's true strength isn't in his crown, it's in what he does when it's taken from him. I never understood it then. Now I did. I was stripped of everything: power, comfort, title, but for the first time I felt strong. As dawn began to bleed across the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and fire, I turned one last time to look at the palace in the distance. Its towers glimmered faintly, proud and cold, like a memory that refused to fade. I whispered into the wind, "I'm no one's slave anymore." And with that, I turned away and walked toward the rising sun, each step carrying me further from the boy I had been and closer to the man I was meant to become. The road led me to a small village nestled between the hills, a place so quiet that the sound of my boots on the dirt road felt almost intrusive. The people there were simple: farmers, merchants, children with dust on their cheeks and laughter in their throats. They didn't recognize me, and that anonymity was both freeing and frightening. I had spent my entire life surrounded by people who bowed at my name. Now I was just another stranger passing through. It was strange how comforting it felt to be invisible. I stopped by a well where a few villagers were drawing water. An old man with weathered skin looked at me curiously and asked, "You look lost, son. Looking for someone?" His tone wasn't filled with fear or respect. It was kindness, pure and uncalculated. Shook my head and smiled faintly. "Maybe I'm just looking for myself." He chuckled softly, unaware of how deeply his question had struck me. He handed me a cup of water, and for the first time in my life, I drank without anyone watching or waiting to refill it. It tasted like freedom, simple, unpolished, real. As the day went on, I helped him and a few others carry wood and gather grain. My hands, once used only to hold swords and sign decrees, blistered and bled. But I didn't stop. Every drop of sweat that fell from my skin washed away a piece of the prince I used to be. The villagers laughed at my clumsiness, and I laughed with them. It felt human, genuine, untainted by the weight of royal expectations. For years, I had been taught that nobility was measured by power, but here I saw nobility in every tired smile, in every helping hand, in every act of quiet endurance. That night they invited me to share their meal, a bowl of soup and bread by the fire. It was humble, yet I couldn't remember the last time food had tasted so honest. No golden plates, no servants, no rehearsed courtesies, just warmth, just people. I watched the children play by the firelight, their laughter echoing under the stars, and wondered how something so ordinary could feel so extraordinary. For the first time, I didn't envy the crown. I pitied it. Later, when everyone had fallen asleep, I sat outside, staring up at the stars that blanketed the sky. They seemed endless, uncaring of thrones or bloodlines. The night breeze carried the faint scent of earth and smoke, reminder that this was what life truly was. No walls, no crowns, no fear, just existence. I thought of my father then, and for the first time I didn't feel anger. I felt pity. He had all the power in the world, yet he would never know the peace I felt in that moment. He had conquered kingdoms but lost himself in the process. Still, a part of me knew this peace couldn't last forever. The palace would notice my absence. Rumors would spread. The king's pride would demand action. I could almost hear his council whispering, "The prince has abandoned his duties," but they would never understand that this was not abandonment, it was awakening. I wasn't running from my destiny. I was redefining it. A ruler who doesn't understand his people is not fit to lead them. Maybe one day I'd return, not as the obedient son he molded, but as a man who knew what it meant to be free. As dawn approached once again, the first rays of light kissed the village rooftops, and I rose from my place by the fire. The road ahead was uncertain, but I no longer feared it. The world was vast, and my heart, though scarred, was ready to explore it. I took one last look at the peaceful village that had unknowingly given me my first taste of humanity, and I whispered to the rising sun, "This is where my story begins." Then I walked on, each step steady, each breath carrying the quiet promise of a prince who had finally learned to be human. The news of my disappearance spread through the palace like wildfire. By the time the morning council gathered, chaos had already settled in. Servants whispered in corners, guards scrambled to search the stables and surrounding woods, and the royal messengers galloped through the gates with sealed orders, bearing my father's crest. I could almost imagine his face, ashen with rage, his pride bleeding beneath his crown. To him, my absence was not a son's rebellion, it was humiliation. The mighty king had lost control of his heir, and nothing wounded him more deeply than public disgrace. The throne room must have been heavy with silence when he entered. I knew how he looked when he was furious, his steps slow, his eyes dark, his jaw tense enough to shatter stone. The courtiers would have bowed lower than ever, praying not to draw his wrath. My mother, I was certain, sat quietly by the window, her hands clasped tight, her heart trapped between loyalty and grief. She would not dare to speak in front of him. She never did when anger ruled his mind. But I knew her silence was not approval. It was fear. She feared what I had become. But more than that, she feared what he would do to find me. They searched every corner of the kingdom. The soldiers tore through villages, questioned travelers, and demanded information from anyone who looked out of place. Some said the king himself had ridden out to oversee the hunt, his cloak trailing like a storm cloud behind him. The people whispered about his fury, calling it divine justice. But others pitied him, saying he had driven his son away with his iron rule. Each rumor carried a different truth, but none of them knew the real one, that the prince wasn't running from duty, he was running toward himself. As I heard travelers speak of these things in the marketplace, I couldn't help but feel a strange ache in my chest. I should have felt free, but instead, I felt the pull of the past tightening like an old wound. Despite everything, he was still my father. I knew he wouldn't rest until I was found, not out of love, but to prove he still had power. Yet part of me hoped he would understand that maybe when the throne room echoed with my absence, he would finally realize the weight of his own chains. But deep down, I knew kings rarely learn through loss. They only learn through conquest. Days turned into weeks, and my reflection in the river began to change. The softness of royalty was fading, my hands were rougher, my face more tired. Yet my eyes, those same eyes that had once mirrored his, now carried some indifferent resolve. I worked alongside farmers, shared bread with strangers, and slept beneath the open sky. Each night I dreamed not of palaces but of purpose. And though part of me missed the life I had left behind, I knew that returning now would mean surrendering everything I had fought to become. But fate has its own cruel rhythm. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, I noticed a group of riders approaching the village. Their armor glinted in the dying light, bearing the crest of my house, the royal serpent coiled around a crown. My heart froze. They were searching here now. For a brief moment, I considered running deeper into the forest, vanishing like a ghost into the wild. But then a thought struck me. How long would I run before I stopped being myself again? How long could I hide from the man I was becoming? That night, as the villagers hid me in a barn beneath stacks of hay, I listened to the soldiers question them outside. The captain's voice was cold, familiar and disciplined, the voice of a man who had once trained me in swordsmanship. By order of His Majesty, he said, anyone hiding the prince will be executed for treason. My heart pounded as I heard the villagers deny knowing me. They risked their lives for a stranger. And in that moment, I realized something that changed me forever. The people I had been born to rule understood loyalty better than any royal ever could. Would you like me to continue with the 77 more long paragraphs where the prince narrowly escapes capture, forcing him to face the painful truth about his father's obsession with control?